Shining a bright red, as always, is Red Luster, and today's video is all about camping and tunneling in Dead by Daylight and how to avoid it. We will be talking about the main 4 different roles when it comes to these situations. The Uninvolved, the Rescue, the Victim, and a secret 4th role I'm not going to reveal until I get to it. So sit back, relax, and let me explain to do in what role. Firstly, the Uninvolved. This role usually refers to those who are extremely far away from the action taking place, or happen to see someone else already heading in. What can you do to discourage tunneling and camping? Well, quite simply, generators. Nothing pressures a killer more than knowing that he's possibly wasting time whilst you are doing gens. Every time a gen pops or a skill check is missed, the killer gets pressured more and more, knowing what little time he has to stop you guys is being used up. But here's a good question. How do you know if anyone is going for the save? If you don't see anyone, running off for it, how will you know if anyone's going to do it? And if everyone assumes someone else is doing it, then that person could get to stage 2 or worse. Well, my friends, there's an easy solution to that problem, and more. It's a perk called Kindred. In addition to its primary effect, its secondary effect will allow you to see where everyone else is and what they're doing, allowing you to figure out if going for the save is up to you or not. Next up is the Rescue. This is probably the second most important of the 4, so please pay close attention. A lot of what you do will affect the odds of camping or tunneling. So, first and foremost, do not rush for a save. If a person just got hooked, do not go running in for a save just yet. You want to pay attention to the killer. If the killer has no idea where the other survivor's at, or isn't currently in a chase with one, there's a pretty high chance that if you go for the save then, he'll just come right back to the hook, because at least then he'll know the general area of 2 survivors. Then there's also the mental effect that save rushing causes. If a survivor the killer hooked gets saved quickly, the killer is going to assume that when he downs someone, there's probably someone waiting nearby to go for a save once he leaves. This can encourage the killer to camp, especially if he catches someone trying to do this. It will make them think that camping the hook is a good idea, and you don't really want that, now do you? Now, I know there's a perk called Borrowed Time, or BT for short, that gives the rescued survivor the endurance effect, but only if they're rescued in the terror radius. Don't let it encourage you to go hook rushing, as in some cases you may just be dooming the survivor you're trying to save. If the killer has saved the best for last, for example, if the saved survivor is not the obsession, then to him, hitting that unhooked survivor now gives him 2 stacks, because he can just hit them and then down them again. And if he already has maximum stacks, then he can easily eat right through their endurance effect because they have no cooldown. And unless that person gets to a loop right there and then, it's going to be an easy down. Borrowed time should be reserved for situations in which the killer in question will not leave the hook survivor, aka face camping. Moving on, let's get to the 3rd role, the Victim. Now, most of what you can do can only be done prior to being hooked, so try to keep this all in mind beforehand. There's quite a few reasons why a killer may be camping or tunneling you, but let's talk about the main 2 reasons this is most likely to be. 1, the killer is tilted, or 2, he may be thinking that other survivors are nearby, or he is aware that there are other survivors nearby. Now, going on tilted, the emotional state of the killer can affect your chances of being camped or tunneled considerably. So don't make them angry. Don't do anything just don't try to make them angry or frustrated. After all, the biggest factor of it all is that it's up to the killer to decide if they're going to camp or tunnel you. So, how can you avoid upsetting the killer? Well, it differs person to person. There is some general things you can avoid. Firstly, and this probably shouldn't go without saying, or this should go without saying, I'm sorry, taunting. Do not taunt. Taunting, like crouching repeatedly or clicking your flashlight, can make the killer more angry in most cases, especially if you're doing it from a position of safety. Whilst tilting the killer does come with some advantages, keep in mind the angrier and more frustrated they are, the more likely they'll be happy to throw the game just to make sure you don't escape. Also, looping. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of looping, but only if you're actually trying to escape the killer. If you're just looping for the sake of wasting as much time as possible, and you just go to loop to loop to loop, waiting for the killer so you can loop most optimally, they're going to become more and more dedicated to the chase, and they'll become more frustrated. Again, leading them to be happy to throw the game just to get you. Then there's also the fact that finishing anything in front of them can also tilt them a little bit. Like totems or generators, right in their face. Like they're coming up to you, and you finish it right in their face. They're gonna find it kind of insulting. Like you're not even acknowledging their presence. Also, flashlight blinding at every pallet is pretty bad. Bad idea. Head-on stunning, it's also a bad idea. You get the point. Don't frustrate the killer if you don't want to be camped or tunneled. If you're doing those things, then you don't really have the right to be upset when you're tunneled to death, because you've pretty much invited it onto yourself. But let's say you've gotten to the point where you are on hook. What are the other things you could do to avoid camping or tunneling? Well, there's only really two perks worth considering about when you're on the hook. Kindred and Decisive Strike. Now, Kindred is a really good choice, as when you're on the hook, it will allow your team to see each other, as well as the killer if he happens to be camping you. Giving your team valuable information can possibly lead to them more successfully rescuing you without the killer, being really close by to go right for the tunnel. Granted, you have to keep in mind that you have to have somewhat intelligent other teammates, and that can be pretty subjective, but it will improve your chances. Now, the other perk is Decisive Strike, and it kind of depends. In some situations, it can actually get you tunneled more than less. If you use Decisive Strike really early on, it can lead the killer into tunneling you. Again, because, well, you can only DS them once. And once you DS the killer is now aware that you no longer have DS. So, when's the perk great to use? Decisive Strike is best saved for a last-ditch effort rather than being your first choice. If the game is pretty much over, like there's all the generators are completed and you're trying to get to the door but the killer won't leave you alone, that's a really good situation to have Decisive Strike ready. Otherwise, using it earlier on can just more or less encourage the tunnel rather than discourage it. Now, lastly, what's the hidden role? Well, it's killer! Surprise! If you are the killer, should you camp and tunnel? Well, it depends, but in certain situations, it may be the best play. If you just hooked a survivor and think other survivors might be nearby, then don't leave the hook because of some arbitrary honor system the survivors want you to play by. However, this doesn't mean you should camp every hook you get. That's not a good option either. I support smart camping and tunneling. Not this stupid get a survivor on the hook and then wait for people to come get it. No. Smarter survivors, if they see that you're camping or trying to use the hook survivor as bait, the smarter ones will just rush to generators and the majority of them will still escape. So, what's the best solution to know when to camp or tunnel? Well, the best perk for this situation is barbecue and chili. This perk is great for deciding if you should stick around hooks or not, as you will be able to see the aura of survivors that are far away. Now, if you notice an aura is missing, it can only mean one of three things. A, they're hiding in a locker. B, they're using a perk to block your aura reading, which is not really likely because those perks aren't very good. Or, most likely, C, they're too close for you to see them, likely hiding to get ready for the save. Now, there's also scratch marks. If you see scratch marks nearby that were not left by a survivor you just hooked, then you either just scared another survivor away, or again, they're just getting ready to sneak in for the save. Now, when should you tunnel? Well, if you don't have anything else going on, you're still somewhat nearby if you're still somewhat nearby the hook, going back to it isn't a half bad idea. Now, keep in mind that by doing this, you're more than likely pressuring two survivors into not doing generators. Then there's also the fact that there's a good chance that the unhooked person will just be an easy down. They are still injured after all. And if they don't have borrowed time, it's a free down. And if they don't have DS, then it's a free hook. And if they do have borrowed time, if you have saved the best for last, that's free stacks, or it could be an easy down again. And if they do have Decisive Strike, well, they won't anymore once they use it up. Ultimately, the choice to camp or tunnel is up to you, the killer. Just try to ensure that whatever you do, it benefits you the most in any given situation. And this has been how to avoid camping and tunneling in Dead by Daylight. If you found this video helpful, leave a like. If you want to give tips or maybe argue a point, leave a comment down below. It's free for discussion. I've mostly made this video to help people that get really frustrated with camping or tunneling, and well, they mostly just want to blame the killer for it when it's mostly a issue that revolves around everybody, not just one person. It is ultimately the killer's choice to do this, but the other people do have an influence to which choice he goes with. Anyway, this has been Red Luster, signing off.